This is the Tree of Life, Season 22, Chapter 9. In this episode, we will be talking about the chirality of the digital structures produced by infinite recursion through sublimation and verbalization, and contrasting them to their counterparts outside the bubble universe. To start out, if you imagine that time parsimony and path parsimony diverge during a substitution event, and you imagine that before this divergence, the same exclusionary structure would describe both observers, and you imagine that in negation, observer 1 travels down a convoluted path, with further negation, leading to further convolution, more negation, and more convolution, and so on and so forth. The analog structure, which describes the path of observer 1 during these convoluted paths versus the digital structure, which describes observer 2 during their path, diverge with an infinite slope. Now, exclusionary structures are defined dialectically. That is, they represent affirmation of impulse 1 and negation of not impulse 1. Thus, in the flipping of phase, we don't see the substitution of one limited set for another, but rather the whole of the not set for the original set. Thus, on path parsimony, the infinite negation of infinite recursion represents the whole of the not set. You can imagine, thus, that the observer on the path of time parsimony follows a continuous path. Whereas, for the observer on path parsimony, the path diverges infinitely into a space with a boundary, which is infinite only because it is embedded dialectically. Thus, the digital structure created at the conclusion of each convoluted path is not identical to that corresponding to time parsimony, but rather is chiral to it. Rather like a mirror, the barrier at the edge of the bubble universe defines a boundary to a space, which is the chiral opposite of the exterior space. The best way to understand this is by thinking of two individuals walking on a path which diverges into two paths, one infinite and one finite. But this path is on a spherical object like a planet. At some point, the path which is infinite is going to come back to itself by crossing the first path. The point at which the infinite path meets the first path again has a reverse orientation, as it had originally. Now, during each convoluted path pursuant to infinite recursion, there is sublimation and verbalization prior to acquiescence and the conclusion of the substitution event. This means that the verbalization, described as a digital structure, has exclusive word associations which are dialectical by nature. But as we saw from the above, these structures are going to be chiral opposites of those which exist within time parsimony. Thus, the specific associations created within the verbalization will have a reversed meaning from those represented in time parsimony. This mirroring is the product of the embedding of infinite recursion beyond the boundary of time parsimony. Now, we saw that after a substitution event, path parsimony returns to time parsimony. But since time parsimony represents structures which are chiral to those produced within the embedded universe, we see that the continuity of these associations is severed by the resumption of time parsimony. In effect, the decoherence erased by the measurement reversal involves the elimination of continuous meaning in the verbalizations which produced the recursive or convoluted paths. In this way, these bubble universes are erased by the non-integration of their exclusive associations, by the reversed chirality within the external universe. In past episodes, we talked about how all of these convoluted paths within infinite recursion happened within time parsimony. But that suggests some sort of information exchange. When what is really happening is a parallel process represented by weak phase linking at the boundary of the bubble universe. It is in this phase linking we see causal reordering. This weak phase linking is guaranteed by the compelling of acquiescence during affirmational cycles such as the sleep cycle. That's the end of the podcast for today.